Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all the ships at sea. Have you ever looked at the world and wondered why some nations perennially struggle with poverty and corruption, all while others seemingly not so much? Why is that the case? Well, this puppet has thought on this particular topic for more than a few years, done some research, and is about to lay out some facts for you that, while the absolute truth, may strike some of you the wrong way. I make no excuses or apologies. Just as my friend Steve Snyder often says, you can put the truth anywhere. Allow your cloth commentator to begin with the topic that actually leads into this, and that would be the history of colonialism in the modern world. Many centuries ago, the Dutch started building seafaring vessels and set out about exploring the world around them. Well, before you know it, they had stumbled upon what are now the nations of Greenland, Iceland, Canada, the United States of America. They eventually also colonized South Africa, parts of South America, and even India. So seeing the Dutch doing well in their colonial exploits, the British soon got involved in colonizing faraway lands. You had the Americas, parts of Africa, and Asia as well. In the midst of all that, the Spaniards wanted a piece of the pie and hence went about making Spanish colonies the world over. On it went, with Portugal, France, and even Germany eventually getting in on colonialism madness. Okay, so where is this conversation leading to, puppet? Okay, my viewers, suffice it to say that all colonies were not created equal. While the Dutch and British largely established systems of civilized common law in their newfound colonial possessions, the Spanish and Portuguese were not always so civil in their dealings with foreign populations. Now, before going any further, allow me to say that I am by no means stating the British and Dutch could not be harsh and even exploitative in their taking over of foreign lands. No. However, it needs to also be stated that Spanish and Portuguese attitudes toward their colonies differed greatly in nature and in practice. And now, folks, I'm going to come right out and say what needs to be said here. Wherever Catholicism went, corruption and evil soon followed. Yes, like it or not, there is really no disputing this point. Take a look at the United States, Canada, Australia, and even New Zealand. Nations all formerly under the rule of the British Crown. These are now some of the most prosperous nations financially and culturally on the planet. Was there corruption in the British colonial system? For sure. Did they ramrod the Anglican Church and their state religion upon every colony they started? That would be a big fat no. Did the British force every citizen to those nations to take their British surnames? That would be a very big no. Did the British colonizers enslave and otherwise torture the local indigenous peoples? Another big no. In fact, it can be said that the British largely improved the standard of living in every foreign land they came to rule. The same cannot be said for the Spanish and Portuguese. From the very first moments the Spaniards set foot in Mexico, it was bloodshed and conquering. Hence the title Conquistador. Once the Spaniards had driven their foreign adversaries into submission, they quickly forced their language upon the indigenous populace, their corrupt religious system soon followed, and then the very wicked Spanish governors were set up to rule their local fiefdoms of now submissive indigenous peoples. If the locals refused to slave for their local overlords, death and torture were far too often the order of the day. Suffice it to say that every valuable resource that could be robbed from these populations was grabbed and shipped back to the motherland, all while the locals suffered like none others. The Portuguese, again largely led by the Catholic Church and the ever-wicked Vatican papacy, used a recipe for death and exploitation that highly mimicked their Spanish neighbors. So, folks, beginning in the late 18th century, the colonies of these former European crowns began fighting back against the too often heavy-handed rule over them and gaining their independence. And you know what happened? Well, I think it is what anyone would expect. Those formerly under more civil systems of British common law proceeded to set up their own new governmental systems, and those based upon the rule of common law, along with large disdain for corruption. But, and a very big but at that, those formerly under the rule of the Catholic violence, robbery, and corruption basically all fell into the same misguided systems for their newly formed governments. I guess old habits are hard to break. For those formerly under vile dictatorial overlords, they saw nothing better than establishing themselves in those same positions and cruelly ruling over an impoverished lower class. And folks, that is where we're at to this very day. You have in the Philippines, a former Spanish colony, they celebrate a national holiday in the name of their national hero, Jose Rizal. His writings led to the liberating forces finally rebelling against the cruel Spanish overlords in 1896. The very sad irony is that the very corruption that Rizal was so adamantly against is still alive and well in the modern Philippine government at all levels. You see, the Filipinos learned well from their former masters. You can also look at Argentina and see the generations of corruption, strife, and struggle since they shed Spain as their overlords in 1816. Basically, large international incidents of bank fraud to presidents taking bribes. Again, skills learned well from their former Spanish Catholic overlords. Go down the list. There is a reason why every nation on the South American continent struggles to this very day. They have a spiritual sickness learned from vile religious conquerors of centuries past. Let us now also take a look, my loyal viewers, at the African continent. There are many former European colonies there. It also needs to be noted that the governments set up in many of those are corrupt and exploitative in nature, much like the people who set them up saw daily under their former overlords. Now, in saying this, I need also note that many of those were formerly under British, German, Belgian, and even French rule. I'm not going to say that the British did not leave some corrupted former colonies along the way, but I think we also need to see that former colonies that wanted to set up systems of honesty and ethical rule largely prevailed in the world we have today. And so, my faithful viewers, what do we make of all of this? I, for one, think it is safe to say that the United States needs to be very careful as it relates to peoples from foreign lands migrating here. If spiritual sickness is what they have, how prone to catching it ourselves are we as a nation if we allow unfettered numbers to these to migrate? Do you know why we have two-factor authentication on basically every account we set up these days? Well, friends and colleagues, it is safe to say that did not come from people acting in honesty and integrity. This saddens this puppet greatly because I can remember a time in the United States of America when an honor system was largely in place. Businesses allowed you to write paper checks for your transactions and had no reason to believe the funds were not in your bank account. You will not see that anymore. You could pull into a gas station, fill up your tank, and then go in to pay the attendant. Those days, unfortunately, are also long gone. Do you know what happened? Well, this puppet will tell you what happened. Somewhere along the way, we as a people started allowing unscrupulous peoples from all foreign lands to openly migrate here. And you and I both know what the spiritual attitude was for many of those, considering the former Spanish Catholic systems of vile corruption that they came out of. I'm not painting every individual with the same brush, but I do feel it is safe to speak broadly over certain national groups of peoples who have come here. If you came from a nation where bribery and payola were the order of the day, how likely are you to attempt to live similarly in your newfound homeland? Old habits are far often too hard to break. That is all I have for now, my viewers, just sharing some insights on what ails a good portion of the world. The solution I know, and I think you do also. Good night, my loyal viewers, and sleep well.